to start off by acknowledging that the traditional owners of the land, letting people in at the same time. We are currently on the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and we acknowledge their elders past and present. They have had over 60,000 years of careful stewardship of this land, and sovereignty was never ceded. Today we're going to be hearing from Tim Uebergang, who is actually sitting right behind me, so you might get some mic crossover. I'll make sure I'm muted so that that doesn't happen. Tim Uebergang previously worked at the Melbourne University Systems Garden, and if he didn't have the Cycad bug then, he definitely had it by then. He will be talking about his work with the Global Conservation Consortium for Cycads and a recent initiative he's spearheaded, which is very exciting in terms of climate matching and conservation work as well. So, Tim, you're going to have to come out of mute.
Yes. Thank you. That's my cue.
That is your cue. All right,
Okay.
get to it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see everyone, good number of people here. Just for your reference, behind me is Cycas calcicola in Litchfield National Park, a threatened Cycas species, which is, probably one of my favourite. Okay, I will share my screen. Is that working? Yep. Okay, so today this is a combination of a couple of presentations that we, myself and a few colleagues, gave a few weeks ago at the inaugural Global Consortium for Cycad Conservation. It was held at Western Sydney University. This is, it was a collection of really interesting people from across the country in the fields of science, horticulture, different botanic gardens, and even growers. So this was a presentation about a bit about the collection at the Royal Botanic Gardens, where we're hoping to take it in the future, and some conservation initiatives as well. So just a little bit of a sort of a summary of the site for those who might not be aware. A 38-hectare site, which is located close to the middle of the city on the Birrarung, which is the Yarra River, to the gardens north. And it's probably well, like a lot of botanic gardens, they're green islands, which the greatest concentration of cultivated plants in the area. So we have the luxury of attracting birds and different animals as well. So this is a statement that a colleague of mine, Daniel Olsen, wrote, and I just had to capture it because it just summarizes everything that I believe and what attracts me to the Botanic Gardens world. And it's our curated collections of living plants underpin our statuses as Botanic Gardens. The research, horticultural and education use of these collections is critical in supporting the conservation of wild populations and reducing the loss of biological diversity. It's just, I find that to be a really grounding and motivating statement, and I just need to include that one. So and again, just for those who don't know, the RBGV has 23 collections. We have 190 countries represented, and the collections include geographical, such as southern China, taxonomic and evolutionary cycads, research and conservation, ornamental and cultural, and also ecological collections as well. A really integral part of conservation work and for all botanic gardens is a living collections database. It's essential when when you're working with living collections, but it has even become even more apparent to me when you're starting to talk about conservation collections as well, because as I'll touch on a little bit later, with some of the work we're doing with ex situ stuff. So here's just an example on the right of, for example, a Macrozamia diplomata, and having the climate scenarios that give us a guideline as to where these species might, how they might be suitable to our climate here in Melbourne. And on the left-hand side, as part of a reporting process, we use Power BI. It's only been incorporated in the last 6 or so months, and BI means business intelligence. And it's an opportunity to create running totals of taxa at the gardens, and it sort of lets us know what wild plants we have, represented as W and Z, which is from wild. And from here you can see that 48% is not climate suited and 52% is climate suited. So that's what we're sort of built on as a guide. And we can, this is a live total, so we can continually get those updated daily. And here's just a breakdown of the those climate flags that we have in our database. And these are really indicative and really guide us strongly. And it's, you know, the most extreme obviously is the red, which is considered very vulnerable to heat. And then purple, this species is considered very vulnerable to cold. I recently put in Lepidozamia hopeyi from the Daintree, and it came up purple, 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 which is makes a lot of sense. But sometimes with a lot of other plant species, and including cycads, you find the right microclimate and you can actually do interesting things with them. I've got a Lepidozamia hopeyi at home that I've had for about 10 years, and it's growing pretty well in a protected backyard, full shade position. Just another Power BI reporting tool. In this instance, it's to get a summary of our living collections. And this was just a snapshot from 2 weeks ago, and just shows us that, you know, we have 250 families, you know, our genus, our species, our accessions, and our total number of plants. So that's kind of sets the scene for the RBGVs. Oh, the RBG. I'm just talking about the Melbourne site in this instance, the Cycad collection here. So the history of Cycads at RBGV goes back to William Guilfoyle, who was the 4th director, and he kind of pioneered Cycads in the gardens. Specifically, he used Lepidozamia profskiana at the RBGV as lawn specimens, and to have these really commanding plants as lawn specimens will, I'll touch on that again later when we talk about where we're going to head with the Cycad collection in the future. And yeah, and look, we consider Cycads they're very cross-site, and they're very architectural. They have the beauty that sort of can see them positioned in lots of different areas. And as I was talking about the collections before with, you know, China and others, we can put Cycads in the Southern China collection, and we can put them in other ornamental collections, and they sort of work across site and tie the living collections together in a nice aesthetic way. So when I got to the gardens and was lucky to be given the privilege to look after the Cycad collection, we went through an assessment process, myself and lead curator Dermot Malloy, and so we started to look at the collection as a whole, and it was quite interesting to see that the Cycad bed, which I'll show you, the current one, which I'll show you a map, topographical map later, is only had 12 different Cycad species in it. So that was what we represented at the gardens in the Cycad collection, with 12 different species. But the Melbourne Gardens have 92 species across site. And it's quite an ideal location because it sits at a high point in the garden. This is the current, a very rudimentary map of the current sort of the collection, and what this is the current water conservation and the Cycad collection. You can just see at the bottom of the screen there the Cycad collection, the aloe bed to the left, and the water conservation collection. The water conservation collection was part of an initiative through the millennial drought to encourage the public to understand that they could still have quite striking gardens with minimal water use. All right, so the first steps when as part of our assessing the Cycad collection was to do a full audit, and you can see from the pie on the right how we came out with that. So a large group of Macrozamias, which was I think maybe only 5 or 6 species of Macrozamia, but dominated the collection. A good amount of Encephalatus. All the Lepidosamias are all Parefskiana, and then a few others, the Diurne, Cycas, and so on. So part of the audit was assessing all the plants. We also did a full soil chemistry analysis of the collection, just to make sure that we knew what we had and what we were up against, and if we could, if there were any necessities to ameliorate the soils at all. We also started and this came from my time at the University of Melbourne, the system garden. We started using compost teas, and we had a great I saw great results when I had a smaller collection over there by using compost teas, and so we generated our own system here at the gardens, and we've over the last sort of 2 years of using compost teas, we've seen really positive results with flushing, Cycad flushes, and also coning events. So that's been really positive. As well as the audit, we also was really important that, and something that hadn't been recorded, was the gender of each of the plants we had. It's really important to know whether you have seed or pollen bearing cones. It's going to play a role later as far as with our conservation work. And then also if we want to collect pollen, or if we want to try and breed plants that are potentially threatened, that we can then share with other gardens. We also did a IUCN assessment of all the species, so what we knew we had in the collection. So after we did this, after we did a full audit of all the collection, cross-site collection, we decided, the organisation decided it would be a good opportunity to look at the collection and develop it. And here's a few catalysts to how we came to that. We got quite a significant donation a few years ago from a nursery manager of another botanic garden. We wanted to simplify the collection just to emphasise the hero plants in the collection. And I was very fortunate about 12 months ago to be appointed co-chair of the Global Conservation Consortium for Cycad. So that was a great impetus to launch off and to have some momentum to add to this collection. As well, Cycads predominantly aligns well with our landscape succession strategy and our living collections plan, which was all it was fantastic to get that support to push forward into another chapter of this collection at the RBGV. So the plan with the collection was to go from 12 species to increase the diversity. We discussed, myself and landscape architect Andrew Laidlaw, about how this might look and how we might display and tell this story of these really interesting and most threatened plants on the planet in our garden. And geographical representation seemed like a really nice way to talk to that. There's plenty of research and conservation happening in this field at the moment, which I'll touch on later as well. Of course, Cycads have so much that they can offer in an education sphere as well. They they are a dinosaur plant. That's sort of the lines that we sort of hear all the time. But I really love the idea of talking about megafauna and cycads, and I find that to be that's as engaging as dinosaurs in a lot of spaces. So anyway, that's my little bit of education thing. Now, as part of the new collection too, we also considered to have a health and well-being space and a spot where we might be able to consider talking about the plants, and it becomes an education zone as well as movability through the site. Rather than having a site that you walk around, we wanted to have something that you actually engage with and you can move through. So for the second time, this is the new design designed by Andrew. And if you can kind of remember that other topographical map I showed before, you can see Cycads from Africa on the right. That was the aloe bed. So we're going to turn that into Cycads from Africa. We're going to have, and then at the top, that top blob, which was the Cycad collection, that's going to be Cycad diversity. So where we have a strong emphasis on morphology and visual diversity within the groups. Then down the bottom, you'll see Cycads from the Americas. So that's largely going to be things like Diune and some Ceratozamia as well. And I left Cycads from Asia and Australia last because what that is going to be, that's going to be the diversity from Cycad diversity from Asia and Australia, but also it's going to have part of our conservation collection as well. And that photo in the top left is of that is Macrozamia spiralis that we photographed in the field a couple of weeks ago. So, and I will touch on all that soon. So I'm going to start to touch on our conservation collection. In this instance, we're going to lean towards Macrozamias. As I was mentioning before, we had our inaugural Global Conservation Consortium for Cycads workshop, which was a really fantastic workshop at Sydney University 2 weeks ago. We had fantastic representation. We had Cassandra from Begans. We had Botanic Gardens of Sydney. We had science from Queensland and Northern Territory. It was a real, and we had growers as well. It was and parks and also government as well. So it was a really great collection of people that came together with all with the common interest of conservation. Our objectives included for this 2-day workshop was to develop a strategy for a national conservation plan for Australian cycads. The first day was about what everyone was doing in their roles and their research, and then the second day is what we hope to achieve out of this workshop. But one of the big elephants in the room were red listing, and the red listing, the IUCN red listing of Australia has been grossly underrepresented and underassessed since about 2003, when a scientist named Ken Hill, who was from Sydney Botanic Gardens, he did the last lot of assessments, and since 2003 there has been no updates to the Australian to this group of plants. I think it's every 20 years the IUCN likes to update their data for red listing, and because no one had done any assessments, all the information that was gathered were from sources like iNaturalist and then recent uploads from Herbaria on GBIF. And most of these weren't based on any meaningful survey data, and at best just added new point localities. So it wasn't something that the IUCN, it was a means to an end of trying to fill those gaps, but it wasn't ideal because it didn't provide any real demographic data and didn't inform our inform conservation assessments. So we also talked about at the workshop about accelerating conservation action, legislation, and defining a uniform system for conservation ratings. Take homes were actions to develop a new strategy and align with governance, and importantly was identifying engaging with species stewards, be it landowners or in particular Indigenous groups. So Macrozamias. This is just a quick snapshot of the IUCN of Macrozamias, and if we just focus on this slide with the blue, and you see the least concern is almost half of the pie, but the most alarming bit, and this is, you got to remember, this is from 2003. They were nearly all decreasing. So that is quite a stark, real situation. So the Botanic Gardens here, I put together a Macrozamia conservation plan, and they were all supportive of it. and this was looking at the Cycads, Macrozamias in particular, in Australia, and looking at their climate suitability. As part of the Macrozamia conservation plan, we thought it would be a great opportunity to establish a national collection. Now, the driver for me to put together this plan was this map that Peter Symes put together, and the green is the how climate suitable the climate suitability that matches the Melbourne Gardens in 2070, and the cross-hatching is biodiversity hotspots. So from that, we saw that in those climate suitable areas, all these purple areas are national parks and reserves. And then from that, I thought, well, that's quite interesting, because in those parks there's a lot of macrozamias available. So all those macrozamias that are located there are predominantly climate suitable to the Melbourne Gardens. And this map was part of World Climb. I'm going to keep going. So suitable microclimates, as I sort of mentioned before, across site is going to be the best way. Putting all plants in one spot is not going to work, but what we can do is have diversity in one spot, but we play on the microclimates that we have to increase our diversity. We, as part of the work that I've been doing with the Global Consortia and Western Sydney University, and some of the field work we've been doing, we found that Macrozamia elegans was one species that was declining quite rapidly, and we had the opportunity after the workshop to do a four-day field work, in the field, and we did a conservation assessment of Macrozamia elegans, and we collected plants, and we are going to have an assurance colony that we can then use for repurposing back into the wild, and for research as well. A couple of sites in particular will be where we will focus our assurance colony collection, and one will be the Australian drylands, which has a large focus on climate ready and climate suitable plants. And you can see there that there's a dry rainforest, there's the fire adaptation, a collection of fire adapted plants, and also a palm and cycad node, which will be ideal. This is a snapshot of what we have in the gardens now. You can see the Macrozamia. This is all our Macrozamias. And that's actually changed now, because we've got a lot more elegans from our trip for our assurance colony. Anyway, the diversity is growing within the collection, particularly of wild plants. I will briefly touch also on pollen banking. Currently, as similar to oaks, cycads have their recalcitrant seeds, so they're seeds that can't be stored in seed banks. So one way of retaining that genetic material is through pollen, and we've just worked with science to begin a pollen bank. We're going to encourage other gardens in Australia to also get on that. So once with our wild collection, we can start to exchange and work with other other gardens to develop and increase our opportunities for developing wild collection plants in the wild. All right, so nearly there. Moving forward for myself and colleagues working on this group of plants at the gardens, one of our plans is we need to keep on securing funding. We need to do a lot more field work because we want to continue doing conservation assessments of these plants in New South Wales, particular where they're most lapsing. We're looking to increase our collaborative opportunities between all gardens across the country. Eventually, the Global Consortia for Conservation, it is currently Australia, but we do plan to expand out to Oceania. It was just there was a lot more people in Australia to kick it off and get ready. So we're hoping we'll be able to do that as well. We're planning a collection trip in Queensland to get a few species for the garden, and really an important thing that I'm really trying to invest in is building on engagement with traditional owners. There's another case study which would be another presentation about a rare population of Macrozamia in New South Wales. It's on Indigenous land, and we're trying to look at opportunities to work with traditional owners on preserving those species. That's kind of coming to the end now. There's some of our partner organisations who've been fantastic, helping us along the way. And a couple of my collaborators on the side there that have been very useful throughout this whole process. Whew, thank you.
All right on time. Thank you so much for that, Tim. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop off mute, speak up, or you can pop them in chat, whichever you're more comfortable with. I've got, even though I have the privilege of sitting next to Tim and picking his brains about this constantly, a couple more questions occurred to me as I was listening to this. Is genetic diversity in the populations an issue? Because I know you spoke about going and finding populations that were very small, maybe 5 individuals, or populations that weren't there at all. How's that something that you manage, as it were?
Yeah, well, for example, with Macrozamia elegans that we did the recent conservation data, conservation assessments of, we looked at about 8 or 9 different populations, and we searched high and low for some, and we found none, particularly in areas where there was bushfires burnt about 3 or 4 years ago. But then there was a few other sites where we actually found them that they hadn't been recorded for since the 1950s. So for genetic diversity, what we're doing is we've collected. I'm just talking about Macrozamia elegans. We were fortunate enough to collect 8 different phenotypes from 4 different sites. So each phenotype would be from a different mother plant. So that kind of genetic diversity will come into the gardens, but then also we are working with growers and also other botanic gardens to make sure we can build on that as well. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, no, fantastic. Got a question from Virginia here is, how do you work out whether a cycad is male or female?
That is quite interesting. And it does take a little bit of time to get your eye in for that. But essentially, well, yeah, a male plant is a pollen-bearing plant, and they kind of elongate, and you can see the microsporophylls. They're small and elongated, and when a female or a seed-bearing plant, they're a lot more short and stubby, and they have megasporophylls that have the seed in them. It's and some plants some species you can't even, you have difficult telling. So it's a matter of getting your eye in, and yeah, that sort of comes to you over time.
Can I need to
no, go
speak to you. Sorry, Tessa. So Tim, is there a resource that shows you photos of male and female cones and stuff?
Yeah, if you Googled it, you would easily see that. When I had the slide up about pollen, if it would be easier to show you, and I don't have an example in front of me, but basically, yeah, it's a long elongated cone, has microsporophylls, and they have the pollen in them, and they're thinner and longer, and seed-bearing plants are quite stubby. If I had an image right in front of me to show you, I would be a lot easier than fumbling like this.
It kind of sounds like you really do just have to wait for them to cone.
In most instances, you do. You have to. You cannot even tell with some species until it's time to either pollinate or for the insects to pollinate them.
How long can that take?
From to when they're look at it can probably take 6 to 9 months in some instances when you see a cone producing, and until it becomes viable for pollinating. And when I've hand pollinated plants, it can then take another 6 months of the seed maturing in the cone, and then when that seed cone collapses, then it can take another 6 months to make the seeds actually viable to begin germinating. And this is one of the reasons why they are one of the most threatened species, is because they have such a long maturation period.
All right, thank you. Was any other questions? Anybody want to pop out now? No, looks like that is it. Well, thank you so
sorry,
much.
can I ask?
Got another one.
For
Go
being
for it.
yeah, sorry. Can you talk a bit more about the pollen banking and how other institutions might be able to assist with that?
Yeah. So when I was talking about collaborators before, I've been as being part of the Cycad International Cycad Specialist Group and going to some of those international Cycad conferences. I've made connections with a botanic garden called Montgomery Botanic Garden, and they're sort of a leader with palm and Cycad research. So I was able to get a good assessment of the best way to store. There's quite a process to storing and collecting pollen. In fact, at Melbourne University, there's still some pollen from when I was there of Encephalatus horridus, which I left in the deep freeze there. But it is a process of collecting, drying in, and this is in basic terms, drying out in a refrigerator, and then storing at very low temperatures and you can store pollen for. People have used pollen after 10 years and been able to have successfully pollinate plants. But usually it's between minus 20 and 30 degrees is the best temperature for storing pollen.
So Tim, your aim would be to, if someone in Sydney BG or Brisbane BG had a female about to cone, you would post pollen up to them for them to pollinate the female cone?
Yeah, absolutely, Dermot. Now this is actually something that is done in South Africa and in the US. So botanic gardens have a network set up between them so that they can distribute pollen between the gardens, and that's what I'd like to see happen in Australia. And we will do it here with for ornamental plants, so we can propagate rare and threatened stuff, but we'll all, particularly with wild species. And yes, you'll be able to send it between gardens. We took photos of a male cone in habitat a couple of weeks ago of a species, and there's another botanic gardens that's going to try and collect that pollen because they have a female plant. So it's quite untapped as in the way conservation can move in this area.
Great opportunity.
Yeah, it is.
I can see Virginia tippy-tapping away there. Yeah. You're on mute there, Virginia.
Sorry, maybe I should just talk again. Sorry. Can I think it'd be really good to have a list of cycad collections from gardens in Australia. Like, have you got that, Tim, or is someone compiling that, or is it something that needs to happen for the future?
Yeah, that is definitely something that we discussed at the workshop, primarily between botanic gardens, and it's going to be a really big player for conservation in a conservation sense, particularly where we can swap pollen, seed, match climate suitable botanic gardens for different species. To have assurance colonies or ex situ is quite a challenging thing for botanic gardens because it's the space involved and also the hybridization of plants within collections. So there's quite a process that needs to be undertaken, and we are going to set up a network of botanic gardens that are doing that, and collections as well.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for now. So I'd like to say thank you so much for Tim. That was really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. If you do have any more questions, you can see. Sorry, just got someone knocking at the window. You can see Tim's contact details up there. Feel free to shoot him any questions, and of course you can reach out to me as well, and I can pass them along. Thank you all for coming. This has been recorded. We will be uploading it for later viewing. And the next horticulture forum will be coming up at the end of the year, and we'll be looking at the menu of climate change actions, which has been workshopped by the University of British Columbia at the Congress and will be complete, and you'll get the first taste of it then. So again, thank you all for coming and have an excellent day. Bye all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tessa. Thanks, Tim.